You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. 'Cause you make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for your name. It's for your name. There's a healing light just beyond the clouds. Though I walk through fire, I see clearly now. I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. 'Cause you make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for your name. 'Cause you make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for your name. Oh, it's for your name, Jesus. 'Cause when I doubt it, Lord, remind me I'm wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and 'cause when I doubt it, Lord, remind me I'm wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. You make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for your name. 'Cause when I doubt it, Lord, remind me I'm wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. 'Cause when I doubt it, Lord, remind me I'm wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay. I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. You're an artist and a potter. I'm the canvas and the clay.
We're back again, favorite night of the week.
Oh, it's my turn, and I'm about to freak out on this beat. I'm gonna let y'all know from the soles of my feet to the top of my dome. I got some information that y'all need to know at home. It's Thursday night, we about to get right, so sit down tight, cause we about to tuck you in just right.
He actually went off. I was not expecting that, Blake. You really brought it. Blake brought it. Hey, if you don't know who we are, you're all confused by our freestyle. We are the announcement crew. My name is Max.
My name is Blake.
And we are so glad that you have joined us tonight.
I am so excited for tonight's message. I'm so excited for everything that you're here. There's some people right now. We have some first-time guests, Max.
Yes.
They're on the other side of this camera lens, and they're like, what is going on? What did I just stumble upon?
Yeah, they're probably
Who are
confused.
these yahoos?
They just had amazing worship, and now they're like, what?
Who are these weirdos?
Yeah.
But anyway, if you are new with us, we want to connect with you. So here's what you need to do.
Here's what you can do.
All you have to do is text 1825 connect to 56316.
There's no ooh after it. It is just 56316.
Boom.
So be sure to text that. And if you want to get connected even further, be a part of a group. What are they going to text?
They need to text 1825 groups to 56316.
So yes, if you want to get connected, you want to join a group, text 1825 groups to 56316. Another great way to stay connected.
Oh my, tell them about it.
You're gonna get all the updates. Is to follow the Instagram, the gram at Bayside 18.25. So if you want to stay connected with everything up to date, what's happening in the 1825 community, follow that. And there is a special segment.
We got to let the peoples know.
We have to let them know about the Tuesday night talks.
We just had one this last week with Wesley Town. He's a mental health specialist. He's the Bayside Davis campus pastor. He has his own podcast called Better Days. It's about mental health and wellness. And we talked this last week about mental health, the psychology, the sociology, and the theology of Christian beliefs and how we mesh them all together. And how do we have a healthy mental state? That was part one this week.
Part one, and if you didn't see it, be sure to check out the IGTV. It is recorded for your listening pleasure, and I heard part two's coming.
Part two's coming up this next Tuesday. Part two, mental health and wellness through this COVID season. If you know someone that's struggling with mental health, if you yourself are saying, I could use an upgrade in my mental health, come hang out with us Tuesday night, 7:30 p.m. Bayside 18.25 IG Live. We want to see you there.
Make sure to be there.
We got something coming up on Sunday.
On Sunday night. If you have been going, it's been
Sunday
amazing.
Night.
We have service, and we want to see you there. 7:30 p.m.
7:30.
Make sure to sign up. Get your tickets texted to you, whatever it is.
Yep, I think it's a reopen.
GB to 56316. So make sure to text it, fill out the health screen.
Boom.
If you're not healthy, take care of yourself. Stay home. You can still watch it. But if you are, we'd love to have you out there.
And then the last thing, I just gotta say, hey, where are the ladies at? Where the ladies? Hey, ladies. Hey, we've got a ladies' night coming to you on our Granite Bay campus
right here.
This Monday night at 7:30 p.m. at the Granite Bay campus, underneath the tent, underneath the canopy, in the courtyard, however you identify it or however you label it, that doesn't matter to me.
Just be there.
I'm just letting you know that's where it's going to be. There's going to be games, there's going to be opportunity to get inspired, connected to other ladies, older, maybe even some maybe younger than you, who knows? But it's ladies' night, Monday night, 7:30 p.m., Granite Bay campus. Be there.
Just set up a tent.
Speaking of ladies,
we have something. Okay, Cody has been working so hard. Right now, he's grinding, he's putting in the hours.
And let's be honest, today, he wasn't in a good mood today.
He was we were freestyling. He wasn't
vibing with us. He was getting irritated.
I think there's something that could change that. I think if one of you ladies hit him up in the chat, put Cody in all caps with exclamation points.
Yeah.
I think you may be able to work out
I think this COVID season would change drastically for him.
And the whole world, actually.
The whole world. I think all of Sacramento would be impacted.
Starts with Cody.
If he met Mrs. Right.
Cody.
And so we're just trying to make the world a better place by getting Cody.
And we're working on getting Cody to 5'6", 316", so I'll be waiting on that too.
So sweet. That's the 4-on-1. I love y'all. Get ready for this message, because the one and the only Lunds McCowler is preaching tonight. Woo. He's continuing our message series, Battle Lines, and I'm so excited for him to be here with us tonight. Let's give some love to our brother from Australia, from Hillsong City Campus. Put some hand claps in the emojis, whatever you want to do in there. Let's get ready for sermon. Woo!
1825. Oh, wow. I sure do miss you guys. I've loved watching what's happening from your side of the world. Love watching how you guys have lent into really what's happening in our society right now. I love that you have pastors and are a team and the kind of the community who don't shy away from the stuff, who don't shy away from the tough conversations, who don't shy away from leaning into the heat of the action and the eye of the storm. And I tell you what, for me, being across the other side of the world, it matters. It means the world, and I've loved being on the journey with you. And I can't wait to get to see you again, and I can't wait to be with you. You are my family across the other side of the world, and again, I never, ever, ever want to get in front of you as a community and never take a moment to honor your pastors, Blake and Kel. Some of the best and finest leaders who have now become friends, who have become family. I do love you, Blake. I love you, Kelly. I love you. I know that you are jealous of my bromance with Blake, but it is what it is. You just have to accept it. We're in this thing together for life, and I'm just so honored that you allow me the opportunity to speak on your platform, to share with your community, who really has become my community. And so I'm excited. We're getting straight into it. So I know that we are on week 3 of this series called Battle Lines, Focus Your Fight. I've loved watching the series. I've loved following it. I've loved hearing Blake speak. It's funny, I listened to, I think it was week 1 with my wife, Kristen, and she was like, man, Blake's a heavy hitter. And I was like, yeah, he is. But I tell you what, if ever there was a message, if ever there was a series that was more poignant for our generation, for our community, it was this one. And so I know that for some of it was quite heavy hitting, and some of it was quite confronting. And I love seeing you get vulnerable, Blake. I'm surprised you didn't cry. But I just know that at your age, I would have been extremely grateful to have a pastor who spoke with such grace and truth into our lives, because I tell you what, this is the stuff that will sustain you. This is the stuff that will keep you in the long haul. So we are picking up today, week 3. We're talking about battle lines, and Blake's asked me to kind of talk on battle lines, fighting for justice and advocating for the marginalized. And I'm excited about this, and I'm sure if many of you have been following my social media or my life really for the last couple of months, and even beyond that, you'd know that this is a topic that is of great love and passion for me. It's funny because over the last couple of weeks I've been asked to speak in different spaces around justice and around social justice, around even the race issue we're finding, and even beyond that. And it's funny because I was sitting thinking, when did I become the social justice guy? It's like, because we do that. We do that as a church. We put social justice like a department in the church. We put we have these social justice warriors. People talk about Chris Kane as a social justice warrior. We have people we look at and go, they're the social justice people. But I quickly felt like God confronted me on that. And he's like, when did social justice and the church and being Christian become mutually exclusive? And the truth is they're not. In fact, if anything, I realize I'm passionate about this stuff. I'm passionate about justice because I am a Christian. Because I love Jesus, because I read the Bible, I read the gospel and realize that this is part of who we are. In fact, when you look at the word and you look at our responsibility as believers, beyond loving one another and beyond loving God, this is what we should be known for. We should be known for our passion and our commitment to the social justice issues that plague our societies. This is our lane. This is our moment. And so that's why I'm excited to talk about this today. And I believe that all of us, by the end of this message would really understand that this is our responsibility. This is who God has called us to be. So I want to kind of start off jumping into James chapter 4, which I believe is the key passage for this entire series called Battle Lines. And I want to pull out some observations. I'll start there, it won't be where I finish, but I thought we'd open up with this passage. So let's go together again as a reminder. So I think it's such a critical passage. So James 4, verse 1, it says, what is causing the quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You want what you don't have. Isn't that symptomatic of our generation? Why we find ourselves in debt, why we find ourselves withdrawing in overdraft on credits, or we find ourselves trying to keep up with the Joneses. We want what we don't have. And so this is what happens. We scheme and we kill to get it. You get jealous of what others have. Comparison, what plagues our generation again. We are jealous of what others have, but we can't get it. So you fight and you wage war to take it away from them. So it continues to say this. You don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. And it continues to say this. And even when you do ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. And you only want what will give you great pleasure. And he goes on to say this, it's a pretty heavy hit verse. It says, you adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? I say it again, if you want to be a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. Pretty heavy hit passage, but I love it. I really do, and again, this is the beauty of the gospel, and this is the beauty of the word of God, is it's meant to challenge us, it's meant to convict us. In fact, I read something the other day that says this, if you find that God always agrees with you, then you perhaps need to relook at your theology. And I think that's a great thought. And I think I love this passage that we've been reading, because if you look at some of the worst atrocities that are taking place in our world right now, if you look at some of the worst parts of our society, many of the things covered in this passage are responsible for that. You look at things like greed, you look at things like murder, you look at things like hate and war, sex trafficking, racism, sexism, amongst a myriad of other things. All these things are a derivative of some of the things that James is challenging in us in this passage. And so I believe that if we can get ourselves right, if we can challenge ourselves around some of these ideas presented in James 4, I believe we can play a significant role in changing our society. We have got to, I love this idea of battle lines, we have got to wage war on this kind of thinking. We have got to wage war on these attitudes and these behaviors, not just out there, I love what Blake said in week 1, not just out there, but within ourselves. And I think this is so important because, again, if you just have to be on social media for more than 2 minutes to realize that, particularly in us as believers, we have become so preoccupied and we have become so consumed with being the moral compass for everybody else but ourselves. And I think it's important for us to realize, as I've begun to learn, that I believe that we can change our society a whole lot faster if us as believers became more passionate and more consumed and more vigilant with what was going on in our own lives before we worried about everybody else's life. And I believe our world could be a different place. And so, yeah, don't get me wrong. I am active on places like social media. I'm active in terms of bringing education and awareness to people. I'm active in terms of bringing challenge and hoping to bring understanding to people on the issues of racism and other aspects of justice. But don't be mistaken to believe that that is the greatest thing that I bring and contribute in terms of this justice space. No, I do twice as much in terms of self-evaluation, twice as much in terms of checking my own spirit, checking my own heart, checking my own behavior patterns, more than I do checking other people's behaviors and checking other people's attitudes. In fact, I don't know, probably in the last, I'd say 6-7 years, I don't know a single day has gone by where I've not woken up and considered Psalm 51 verse 10. God, would you create in me a pure and clean heart? That is my heart. And I tell you why that's important. It's important because I understand that if my heart isn't right, if my heart isn't surrendered to God, and which essentially what works with what Blake was talking about last week, if our hearts aren't right and our hearts aren't surrendered, then even the good that we try and accomplish in our world will always be tainted, because it's going to be clouded, it's going to be masked, it's going to be tainted by oftentimes selfish desires and sinful and destructive thinking. So it's imperative that we've got to be different. We have got to be different from the world. We have got to not be the kind of people like James in chapter 1, I think, talk about, who read the scriptures but walk away and don't do it. We've got to read the scriptures and apply this stuff. So take a hard look at our hearts. Take a hard look at our own lives and ask God to create in us a clean and pure heart, because this is the only way we can actually become effective in bringing justice to a world that so desperately needs it and fighting for the marginalized. I tell you why. Unless we can fix our hearts, we will end up being more part of the problem than we are part of the solution. So how do we do this? Another passage I want to read to you that I really kind of feel like is for us tonight, wherever you are, is in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 14 through to verse 21. So let's go there together. It says this: Christ's love controls us. Man, I could finish that right there. If this is all that you remember, if this is all that you take hold of right now, I believe it can shape the way you live your life. I believe it'll shape the way you live. It'll shape the way you treat people. It'll shape the way you lean into justice. It'll shape the way you treat the marginalized. It'll shape the way you talk about people. It'll shape the way you think about people. It'll shape your generosity. It'll shape the way you serve. Just that phrase alone. Christ's love controls us. Not our selfish desires, not our evil ways, not our sinful ways, not our greed and jealousy and anger and malice, but we are controlled by Christ and His grace and goodness. That alone is the key to being all that God has called us to be. But I'm going to continue on anyway, because there's so much goodness in this passage. It says this: Christ's love controls us. And since we believe that Christ died for all, we also believe that we have all died to our old life. He died for everyone, so that those who receive His new life will no longer, watch this, live for themselves. He died for everyone. I want to read that again. Now watch this. Everyone. No one is excluded from the kingdom. No one is excluded from His love. No one is excluded from His redemption. We are all equal in the eyes of God. Since He died for everyone, we who have received His new life will no longer live for themselves. Instead, they will live for Christ, who died and was raised for them. Fast forward to verse 18 for the sake of time. All of this is a gift from God, who brought us back to Himself through Christ Jesus. And now God has given us, watch this, God has now given us the responsibility. He has given us the task of reconciling all people back to Him. Why? Because God was in Christ reconciling the world to Himself, no longer counting people's sins against them. And He has given us this wonderful message of reconciliation. So now we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making His appeal through us. Oh my gosh, I want to say that again. God is making His appeal through us. What is God's appeal? God's appeal is found in this passage, that all people might be reconciled to Him, that all people might experience His love, that all people might walk in freedom, that all people might walk in dignity, that all people might be accepted, that all people might be valued, that all people are equal in the eyes of a loving God who found them worth dying for. We now represent Him, and He is making His appeal to the world through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. For God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin, so that we could be made right with God. If you're looking for another title, I suppose, to this message is titled, This Is Us. This is us. I know it's not as cool a title as Blake's. Extraordinary or revolutionary simplicity. Ah, gosh, so creative. Here I am just giving you, this is us, But I honestly couldn't think of anything else. I couldn't think of anything else because I wanted us to catch that talking about justice, fighting for justice, and advocating for the marginalized falls very much in line with who God has called us to be. This is us. We are carriers of justice. We are the ones who God has commissioned as He works through us and pleads through us to fight for those who He died for, to fight for those who've been forgotten in our society, to fight for those who've been mistreated, to care about those and to bleed with those whose hearts bleed. In fact, I heard A.R. Bernard say this. He says this, it is with the shedding of blood that there was remission of sin. And I took it a step further, and I believe this. It is when our hearts bleed with those who are bleeding in our society that we can see a remission of racism and sexism and injustice in our world. We aren't effective in the justice space because we have not understood that this is who we are, that this is us, and God has called us to be part of the solution. So, what does it look like for us to be advocates of the marginalized? What does it look like to fight for justice practically? If this is us, what is demanded of us? So I've got 2 points for you, very simple. Not gonna go for too long tonight. But 2 points is this. Number one, if this is us, if this is who we are and this is what we're called to do, then number one, we've got to find our voice. You got to find your voice. In fact, a couple of years ago, there was an interview between Stephen Furtick and T.D. Jakes. And T.D. Jakes had just put out a new book that kind of sits in two spaces. It was a leadership book that was also about entrepreneurship. And Stephen Furtick asked him this question. He says this. He goes, what was missing from the conversation? Because there were 56,000 books on entrepreneurship at the time. And there were 257,000 leadership books and resources out there at the time. And Stephen looks at Bishop and he says, what was missing from the conversation that made you want to add your voice? And I remember listening to that question thinking, what a great question. What a profound question that I believe applies for us today. I think the question we're going to ask ourselves is this: what is missing from the conversation in our society right now that needs our voice? Because many of you are sitting thinking, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do. And I believe that the answer to that question is your voice. It is the voice of believers. It is the voice of those who are carriers of the gospel, carriers of the good news. We have right now people speaking into racism, speaking into sexism, speaking into sex trafficking, speaking into all the injustice in the world. But I believe right now the narrative and the conversation around injustice is being led by everybody but the church. I believe right now the conversation is being led by everybody but you and I, the believers. And this is what is missing from the conversation in our society. We need your voice. We need your advocacy. We need you. And I want to say this big, why your voice matters. Your voice matters as a believer because so much hinges on your voice as a believer, because so much hinges on the life-giving words of the gospel. In fact, I love what it says in Romans 10 verse 14. How can they know if they have not heard? And how can they hear if nobody tells them? We will never see true justice and peace on the earth without the gospel, without Jesus at the very center of it. Without the church, without you and me, we will never see things change in our society. So this is not the time to shrink back. This is not the time to kind of retreat and to lose your voice. This is the time to stand up. This is the time to speak up. This is the time to show up. This is the time to declare the good news of the gospel into a world that so desperately needs it. Because here's the truth, your voice as a believer, no matter how small or great, it opens up the way for the power of God to be made known. I want to say that again. Your voice as a believer, no matter how small or great, opens up the way for the power of God to be made known. And we need the power of God. We need revival now like never before. In fact, I want to take it another step further. Your voice, no matter how small or great, wherever you find yourself. So you may go, I don't have a national voice. I don't have a big social media platform, but you do have a platform. You do have influence. You do have a family. You do have a social network. You do have a community. You do have a high school you're a part of. In fact, I'm not talking to youth anymore, I'm talking to young adults. So you do have a college community you're a part of. You do have a friendship group. You have a space where your voice matters. And so I want to say to you as a believer, your voice, no matter how small or great, wherever you find yourself, positions God in a world that is void of hope, truth, love, grace, and peace. This is why your voice matters. In fact, I've been thinking a lot recently because a lot of it, particularly in the space on this racial tensions that we're experiencing right across the world. It's not just exclusive to America. We're experiencing this here in Australia. We're experiencing in the UK and South Africa and different parts of the world, all across Europe. And I've been thinking as I've listened more and more as to this conversation unfold, I've listened as the conversation has quickly shifted from providing solutions to shifting, and the whole conversation now has been centered around whole Black Lives Matter. And there's a whole bunch of contention, there's a whole bunch of strife, there's a whole bunch of arguments and people refraining from conversing, people fighting over this stuff because of the movement Black Lives Matter. Now there are merits to having a conversation about the movement because there are some things that we as the church as believers diametrically oppose when it comes to the movement. But I believe there is a distinction between the movement and the statement that validates the lives of those whose lives have for too long been seen and deemed irrelevant. But even beyond the Black Lives Matter conversation, I want to ask probably the bigger and more important question. I would say this: instead of us getting upset and engaging in debates over Black Lives Matter, whether it's right or wrong to say it or believe it or back it or fight for it, I believe the bigger question is this: what was missing from the conversation that Black Lives Matter became the loudest voice? If we had not neglected our responsibility as the church, if we had not remained silent when people were dying, if we had not remained silent when people were being mistreated, if we had not remained silent when there was a lack of justice for the black community, if we had not remained silent when people were dying on the streets with no justice or no recourse, then Black Lives Matter would not have needed to exist. The existence of Black Lives Matter is an indictment on us as believers. Black Lives Matter had to form because no one was speaking up for the black community. Black Lives Matter had to start because no one was holding to account the systems and structures that oppress the people of color in our world. And I believe had we as the church not neglected our responsibility, then Black Lives Matter may have never needed to exist. So I believe now more than ever is the time to find your voice. If you have an issue with Black Lives Matter, then step up and become the loudest voice, and we get behind that. I believe if the church across the globe can stand and become who God has called them to be, ambassadors of Christ who plead for Him, I believe we can drown out the voice of Black Lives Matter and we can magnify the voice of God, who validates, who legitimizes, who backs and champions all people everywhere. But until that day, until you can step up into the plate, until you can stand and play your part, until you can be the voice that champions people and fights for the disenfranchised and fights for the marginalized, you have no right to criticize another movement who's stepping in because the only reason they exist is because we neglected our responsibility. I hope it's not too harsh for you. I hope you're picking up my heart. I'm passionate about the church being who God has called us to be. In fact, I love what Romans 1 verse 14 to 17 says. This is Paul talking. I want you to hear Paul's heart and his passion for preaching the gospel. He says this: everyone I meet, it matters little whether they are mannered or rude. Everyone I meet, they deepen my sense of interdependence and obligation. And that's why I can't wait to get to you in Rome, to preach this wonderful good news of God. Imagine we had that kind of resolve. Imagine we were those kinds of people. We found our voice and we had this divine calling and this divine commitment to going, I cannot wait to get into the communities of people who are broken. I cannot wait to go to the poor. I cannot wait to go to the needy. I cannot wait to go to the oppressed. I cannot wait to find people in my community who are suffering so I can the more people in my society that I see and I engage with, they only increase my obligation and interdependence to preach the good news. Imagine that was our disposition. We weren't waiting until the heat came on. We weren't waiting until society put pressure on us. We weren't waiting to avoid cancel culture, but we weren't waiting, but instead we were driven by passion, we were driven by conviction to preach the gospel and to champion people and to let them know and remind them of who God says they are. And here's why the believer's voice, I believe, is also equally more important. Because I believe as we listen to the voices around our society, we're seeing people use their voice, but unfortunately right now, too many people are using their voices to fight against each other. I believe we are called to a higher standard. We are called to be different in terms of how we use our voice. God is calling us to use our voice, not to fight against people, but to fight for people. I think we as the church for too long have been known for what we are against and have not been known enough for who we are for and what we are for. We are for justice. We are for equality. We are for all people. We are for all nations. We are for everybody because God is for everybody. And we will not remain quiet. We will not remain silent anymore as we watch society tear itself apart and we hide ourselves behind our religious walls. We're going to find our voice and use it to fight for people rather than against people. In fact, Pastor Brian often says this to us as a staff. He goes, if we are very little different from the world that we are trying to reach, then we have very little to offer them. I want to say that again. If we are very little from the world that we are trying to reach, then we have very little to offer them. And I think now more than ever, our society, whether they know it or not, whether they like it or not, needs Jesus. And my biggest sadness has been that instead of the world looking at the church and seeing something different, and seeing a better way, and seeing a better response, and seeing a better method to fight against injustice, they have begun to see more of the same. We have got to be different. We have got to approach this from a gospel mind. We've got to approach this from the heart of Jesus. This is our wheelhouse. In fact, I laughed in the season. I don't know if anyone remembers Skype. Anyone use Skype anymore? But I was just laughing in the beginning of this pandemic with COVID and how everyone went in lockdown, that everyone was obviously using a digital format to communicate to run meetings. I'm like, this was Skype's moment. Skype has been in the shadows for years, decades. This was the moment for Skype to skyrocket. This was their moment. This is why you exist. And when the pandemic happened, Skype fell asleep at the wheel and Zoom took over. Who the heck is Zoom? Where the heck did Zoom come from? Why is Zoom the number one digital connection meeting platform that we're using during this pandemic? Because Skype fell asleep at the wheel, and I think much can be said of the church. This justice space is the church's mandate. This is what we exist for. This is what we should be known for. This was our moment. And when the moment arose for the church to stand up and be all that God has called to be, here we are sleeping at the wheel. And here we are, Black Lives Matter takes over the narrative because we were asleep at the wheel. Don't be Skype. Anyway, I've got to move on. The second and last thing, that if this is us, if this truly is who we're called to be, then we have to make room at the table. I love this point. In fact, this is, if you've followed my life for any amount of time or have heard me talk for longer than a month, you'd heard me make reference to something about fellowship around a table. I believe this is the greatest method to bring transformation and change to our societies. We've got to make room at the table. Now, what I mean by make room at the table, it's not make more room so we can add more of the same. More people who look like you. More people who think like you. More people who believe like you. More people who vote like you. Only causing greater division. I believe we are where we are as a society in terms of injustice because that we are divided and we have created the separation. We've gone down the aisle and people have gone left and to the right. And I believe it's us as a church to create the third option. It's the kingdom option, which is this: I make more room at the table for different voices, different color skin, different ideologies, different people who think, so we can get together and come together in unity, and we can start to share the gospel and reach people in that method. The table has always been and always be a great conduit for conversation. And I'm passionate about this because the truth is I've come to realize that it's no longer the fact that our church doors are open. It's not enough. It's not enough that you put up verse for the day. It's not enough that you quote MLK from time to time. It's not enough. All this stuff in the fight against racism specifically, I'm speaking about that specifically right now. If that is all that we do, we go, our church doors are open, all are welcome, come as you are. If all we do is post, if all we do is quote MLK, but our social constructs don't change, our social networks don't change, our behavioral patterns don't change, then nothing will change. Because here's the truth, racism and injustice weren't accidental. It didn't just happen overnight. And so if we are going to actually affect real change, then we have to be equally intentional about the reversal of its existence in our society. And the quickest way we can reverse that is to break all the social constructs that racism thrives on. Racism thrives on division. Racism thrives on us creating silos within our communities. The black community hangs that together. The Latino community hangs that together. The Asian community together. And the white community. Racism thrives on social constructs that are divided. So we can dismantle racism in our society through our social constructs as we break down the walls that separate us and we gather together around a table. We have got walls to break down. We've got walls to break down. We've got past mistakes to rectify. We've got to stop with the snap judgments and the misunderstandings that have plagued us and got us to this point. We've got biases to challenge. And we've got preconceived ideas and myths about people that we have to shatter. And the only way that's possible is through conversation. It's through unity that is achieved around a table. In fact, I was reading this article by, I don't know his name, but this is what he says. He says this: sitting down at a table with a group of strangers has the incomparable and odd benefit of making it a little bit more difficult to hate people with impunity. In fact, that's true. It's hard to hate somebody you continually share a meal with. He says this: prejudice and ethnic strife feed off of abstraction. However, the proximity required by a meal, watch this, the proximity required by a meal, there's something about handing dishes around, unfurling napkins at the same moment, even asking a stranger to pass you the salt. It disrupts our ability to cling to the belief that the outsiders, people who don't look like us, who wear different clothes from us, who speak different languages from us, who have different accents from us, deserve to be sent home or assaulted. For all the large-scale political solutions that the world is trying to come up with, the most viable and most effective way to promote tolerance between suspicious neighbors is to force them to have a meal together. And I love this thought, because the truth is, this is how Jesus transformed the world. This is how Jesus changed an entire culture. Because we I think, look on Jesus' time too fondly. We believe that everything was fine in Jesus' day. Everything just worked fine. The government was great. There was no strife in politics. There was no racism or sexism. Everything was just perfect. And here comes along Jesus to bring us the gospel. In fact, when you study and you actually look at Jesus' time, the climate, the religious climate, and the racial climate of Jesus' day was no different from ours that we live in today. There was racism, there was sexism, there was injustice perpetuated by the Roman Empire, there were marginalized and oppressed groups of people, and yet Jesus was able to penetrate that culture and to shift it by liberating multitudes in the process. Not just, watch this, not just by preaching the good news, but by being the good news. Oh, I pray you get this. Jesus penetrated and shifted the culture that looks like ours today, not just by preaching the gospel, but by being the gospel. I labor on this because it has frustrated me to no end. As I've heard different spaces and different people say, the church just needs to preach the gospel. The church shouldn't get involved in this mess of our society. The church just needs to focus on the gospel. Why? Because this isn't a skin issue. This is a sin issue. Miss me with all of that. Okay? It sounds noble. It even sounds fairly reasonable, but it's problematic. I'll tell you why. Because we fail to recognize, and I think because it causes us to narrow the issues in our society. It's a very narrow view of the issues. It's a very narrow view of the gospel. It's a very narrow view of Jesus. Because let me again enlighten you. Jesus, he didn't just preach the gospel into issues that were very physical and real. In fact, when you look at what Jesus did, yes, Christ came to accomplish on earth the remission of sin. But watch this. He still addressed and fought for the practical and real social issues and needs of people. Like exclusion. He included those who've been excluded. He fought against racism with the woman at the well. He fought against classism. He fought against sickness in people's bodies, and so on and so forth. Yes, Christ came to deal with sin, but he also dealt with the practical and real issues that were facing people in our society. And honestly, to be frank, I refuse to believe that we serve a God, and I refuse to have a faith that has no bearing on our humanity, that has no bearing on our time this side of eternity. I can't believe that the God that we serve and the gospel that we preach is only applicable for life beyond now. The gospel we preach in the gospel, I know, is applicable, it is needed and necessary to combat the issues we face in our society today. In fact, I read this quote the other day. It says this: any version of the gospel that cares more about the liberation of people's souls, preaching of the gospel, than their bodies, which is being the gospel, is a tragic narrowing of the gospel of Jesus Christ. I want to say it again. Any version of the gospel that cares more about the liberation of people's souls, preaching, than about their bodies being the gospel is a tragic and oftentimes fatal narrowing of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So let's look at the model that Jesus demonstrated for us when I talk about making room at the table. Here's what Christ did. He searched for people. He received them. He ate with them, and he saved them. And when that word, you look at that word save in the Greek, it really is an expansive word. It speaks of rescue. It speaks of redemption. It speaks of renewing. It speaks of restoring, and it speaks of reconciliation. This is what Christ came to. In fact, it says this: Jesus came to seek and save the lost, the broken, the hurting, and the marginalized. And in Luke 7:34, it says this: he did so by eating and drinking with them. Oh, I love that thought. In fact, I want to demonstrate this to you as we bring this to a close. He did it to Levi. It says in Luke chapter 5, verse 27 to 32. Later, as Jesus left a town, he saw a tax collector, again, somebody who was pushed aside, who was deemed too bad of a sinner, worse than the dogs, worse than scum, the worst of the worst. He saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at his tax collector's booth. Follow me and be my disciple, Jesus said to him. This guy? This kind of guy? Now watch this. So Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Later, Levi held a banquet in his home with Jesus as the guest of honor. Many of Levi's fellow tax collectors and other guests also ate with him. Watch this: but the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law complained bitterly to Jesus' disciples. Why does he eat and drink with such scum? And Jesus answered them, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners and need to repent. In fact, this is an isolated incident. If you look at Luke chapter 19 with the story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is in a tree trying to see Jesus. Zacchaeus, again, despised, hated in his community. Some would classify him as a marginalized member of that community. And yet Jesus sees Zacchaeus, calls him down from the tree, and invites himself to have dinner with Zacchaeus. And it was over dinner with Zacchaeus, around a table. He made room at his table. It was over dinner that then Jesus restores Zacchaeus and validates his existence and gives him forgiveness and reminds him that he is still a son of Abraham who has an equal right to the inheritance of God. It goes on again in Luke chapter 15, does it again. And it does it again at John chapter 4 with the woman of the well. There are stories after stories after stories after stories of how Jesus fulfilled his commission on the earth around the dinner table. So I want to dive into briefly, as again I want to drive this point home because I hope you get it. This is significant. The table is significant. It was significant back then, and I believe it holds as much significance now, because table fellowship back then in a society that was ruled by class, ruled by classism, ruled by segregation in many ways, the table was what told people who looked at your life, told onlookers, it told them who you identified with. It told them who you valued. It told them which class you belonged to. It told them who was in and who was out of your life. The table is significant, and I believe that just because it isn't necessarily something we hold in high esteem today, that the table doesn't hold as much significance and weight and power today. I believe the same can be said of today. Who is in your social network? Who do you hang out with? Who do you spend time with? It tells people around you, it tells people in your world who's important to you and who isn't. Who's in your life and who isn't. Who's welcome in your life and who isn't. Who do you stand with? Who do you side with? And what class do you belong to? And this is why we as believers have to make more room at the table for people who don't look like us. For people who've been oppressed, for people who've been marginalized, for people who our society has told them that they have no place and they aren't worth anything and aren't valuable. I tell you what, when we can use our privilege, when we can use our esteem, when we can use our wealth, when we can use our history, when we can use our social networks, when we can use our connections to lift people up, not give people handouts, but to lift people up and give them a seat at our table. It tells the world that these people have dignity. It tells the world that these people are worth fighting for. It tells people that these people have value. With every meal, we tell the world, hey, you know the marginalized? You know the ostracized? You know the poor? You know the people of color? You know the ones you've labeled as sinners? You know the ones we've rejected? Yeah, they're with me. I stand with them, and I'm with them because they are valuable and God cares about them. I believe we can revolutionize our world one meal at a time, because at the dinner table and in our social networks is where we validate people's existence and we legitimize their value. So as I close, I want to read a prayer that I wrote for you. Wrote for us, essentially, to wrap this up. My prayer is that we would become the kind of community that lives like Jesus and reflects the heart of God to a world that's in desperate need of Him. My prayer is that the kind of people in our society that become marginalized, the poor, the hurting, the broken, the outcast, the people of color in our cities and our communities would come running to us because in us and through us, they saw Jesus. My prayer is that instead of rejection, they would find acceptance. Instead of judgment, they'd find love. Instead of blanket polarizing generalizations and statements, they'd find redemptive and empathetic conversation. Instead of indifference, people were willing to put their reputations, their homes, their time, their lives on the line to become the point of difference between life and death, between condemnation and salvation. I pray that we never become a community who sit on our religious high horses, known for its opinions and our snap judgments, insensitive and divisive comments on social media platforms with everything to say about everybody else, people we don't know and people we've never met. But rather, we would be the kind of people who live lives that are unwavering in conviction, according to the Word of God, and never letting our convictions and our comfortability and our complacency be an excuse to hurt people, be an excuse to forget people, to ostracize them, to villainize them, or dehumanize them, because that is contrary to the very nature of the gospel we preach. This is not who we are. And I want to finish with this quote. It says this: though many have been brought in to partake of the benefits of the gospel, there will always be room for more. Because the riches of Christ are unsearchable and inexhaustible. There is always in Him enough for all and enough for each. And the gospel excludes no one that does not first exclude themselves. So 1825, we have work to do. It's time that we too, like Jesus did, go. Search for people who are hurting and broken. Receive them. Eat with them and allow Jesus to save them. This is how we change the world. This is how we fight for justice and advocate for the marginalized. One meal at a time. And we can't afford to lose our voice. Well, I love you, and I hope that's been helpful. Can't wait to see you soon. Bye.